Sir, it's 4:05. Not many new people are coming in, so I think we can get started.
Okay, we can start, yeah. So this weekend, we will be discussing chapters 3, 4, and 5. Basically, chapter 3 today and 4 and 5 tomorrow. But before we do that, I want to recapitulate briefly what we have said so far last week, so that there is a continuity from last week to this week. We first talked about how one should approach Krishnamurti's teachings. And we said we should not approach it the same way as we approach a piece of knowledge. It's not something to be learned like knowledge and remembered. It's really to be approached like an inquiry. And the subject matter of that inquiry is not the teaching. The subject matter of the inquiry is our consciousness. Krishnaji is raising a lot of questions about the way we live, what all we experience in our consciousness, and also all that which transpires in society. And he's urging us to investigate that, not just intellectually, theoretically, through reasoning and so on, that is superficial, but by watching our consciousness in daily life. He says that consciousness is revealing itself in our relationships. In the mirror of relationship, you can watch yourself. And from there, you learn. So it's important to pick up the questions which Krishnamurti is raising. Neither agree with what he is saying, nor disagree with it, but hold on to that question and watch yourself and try to understand it in relation to your daily life. That's an important difference from the way we have been trained to receive education in what we call knowledge. This is an area of self-knowledge, which requires that you perceive the truth for yourself firsthand, through your own senses, including your mind. Otherwise, you don't have the truth. You only have the description of the truth given by another. And the religious truth, if it is to transform consciousness, needs to be at the level of perception and not merely ideation. So that's the way one has to approach Krishnamurti's teachings if we are to seriously learn about ourselves, using the teaching as a pointer, not as an authority. Because in this field, authority has no significance. In the field of knowledge, authority has significance. The teacher knows more than the student, and he is passing on that knowledge to the student, and the student can look upon him as an authority. Though there also, it is important to question what the authority is saying in order to come upon a deeper understanding. But that understanding is mainly intellectual understanding. And in the field of knowledge, that's good enough. In this field of self-knowledge, it's not good enough. It can be the starting point, but it should not become the ending point. Otherwise, it becomes an illusion. Words have a way of making us feel that we have understood something when we have really deeply not understood, in the sense we haven't seen the truth of that for ourselves. So keeping all that in mind, the importance of connecting all this learning with observation. What you learn about your own consciousness, if you learn deeply, tells you about all human consciousness, because all human consciousness is similar. What is different is just the layer of conditioning, which is dependent on where we are born, which family we grow up in, which country, which religion, and so on. So that conditioning constitutes the content of our consciousness. There is also, of course, the content coming from millions of years of past, which is the biological content, namely the biological instincts and so on. Those are already hardwired into the brain when we are born. But subsequently, the brain acquires from its environment all the cultural conditioning, and from its own experiences and so on, the psychological conditioning, through the memory of all that. And that becomes the content of our consciousness. This content has certain things which are factual, which don't produce any disorder in our life or in our consciousness. But there is also a lot of content which is illusory, which is not factual, which is not part of nature. It is just the construct of human thought, which has been accepted as my culture or my way of living, and so on. It is that which is essentially responsible for the disorder and the division in our lives. Often we are not aware of it because we are proud of our own culture. So Krishnamurti is saying, you have to examine your conditioning. You have to question it. You mustn't just identify with it and go on with it. Otherwise, you contribute to society as it is, because you grow up in that society and you imbibe what is going on around you in that society. So that outer becomes the inner, and then the inner maintains the outer. So there is no possibility of any major change in that if you just accept it and adjust to that society. And society is obviously great disorder, doesn't need to be explained. So he's saying, to be well adjusted to a sick society is no measure of health. These are his words. And that seems to be true, because that content of our consciousness determines all our decisions and all the way we relate with people, the way we behave. Everything is determined by that content in consciousness. And if you say it can't be changed, it is inevitable part of it, and you accept it, then we are contributing to everything in society, including all the evils that we perceive in society. So what is in our consciousness is projected on to our relationships, and millions of such relationships constitute our society. Therefore, we are not separate from society. And unless we transform there is going to be no fundamental transformation in society. We said that, and we went into it in great detail. One question that was raised was whether it's a matter of time, whether one has to perceive all this gradually and evolve, grow in self-knowledge and so on. In a sense, time doesn't help you to come upon perception. You come upon perception instantaneously when you do. But time passes. Anyway, if you have no perceptions, time will not stop. The earth will keep going around the sun, and time, chronological time, will keep going on. So it takes place in time. Insights take place in time, but they are not off time. You don't come upon 20% of the truth and then you see 50% of it, and then it's not like a gradually winding road going up the hill. You are either at the bottom of the hill or at the top of the hill. So, to clarify that, because some places Krishnaji does talk as if you need to perceive all this in one go, and it's either all or none. So I brought with me a passage where somebody asked him this question about what is transformation? What is it to be transformed? And he gives an answer. I'm reading this from the book Meeting Life, edited by Mary Latian, page 97. Questioner says, is there such a thing as transformation? What is it to be transformed? And Krishnamurti says, when you are observing, seeing the dirt on the road, seeing how the politicians behave, seeing your own attitude towards your wife, your children, and so on, transformation is there. Do you understand? To bring about some kind of order in daily life, that is transformation. Not something extraordinary out of this world. When one is not thinking clearly, objectively, rationally, be aware of that and change it, break it. That is transformation. If you are jealous, watch it. Don't give it time to flower. Change it immediately. That is transformation. When you are greedy, violent, ambitious, trying to become some kind of holy man, see how it is creating a world of tremendous uselessness. I don't know if you are aware of this. Competition is destroying the world. The world is becoming more and more competitive, more and more aggressive. And if you change it immediately, that is transformation. And if you go very much deeper into the problem, it's clear that thought denies love. Therefore, one has to find out whether there is an end to thought, an end to time. Not philosophize over it and discuss it, but find out. Truly, that is transformation. And if you go into it very deeply, transformation means never a thought of becoming, comparing. It is being absolutely nothing. So you can see how he is connecting this transformation to learning from watching what's going on in our everyday life around us. But for that, we need to stay with this inquiry, have a learning mind. And he said, this learning mind, which is perceiving what is true and what is false, which is doubting its own opinions, its own experience, and wants to arrive at the truth. It is such a mind that is the true religious mind. That is the essential legacy of the religious inquiry, which started with the Upanishads, then the Buddha, then Socrates, then Jesus, and so on. These are people who are showing us what is the potential that is possible for a human being. They were all human beings. And how did they come upon that transformation of consciousness? By breaking away from the past. Otherwise, you are completely determined by the past, and the past imprisons you. So the conditioning that we have becomes a prison, and it dictates virtually all our life. So that we are ourselves the authors of our sorrows, but we are not aware of that. We blame others, we blame society, but actually, because there is this capacity for inquiry, for awareness, for learning, which we have not exercised sufficiently, it's entirely our responsibility what takes place in our life, and therefore also in society. So one is completely responsible both for one's own life, what is going on, and also for whatever is happening in society, which is what his statement, "You are the world," implies. Now, it may be easy to intellectually see this, but that's not enough, as we said. One has to live with this question and keep watching and learning constantly. It has to be that while you are working, while you are relating, while you are getting angry, fighting, whatever you are doing in your life, there is a part of your consciousness which is watching. And the deep learning comes from that watching. In the Upanishads, one of the Upanishads, there is a beautiful verse which gave a metaphor to explain this. It talks of two birds sitting on a tree. The first bird is nibbling at the fruit and tasting the bitterness or the sweetness of it. The second bird is only watching this bird. And the verse says that the human consciousness is both these birds in one. There is the conditioned part of our consciousness, and there is also this capacity for awareness, for watching, for learning. And all the learning comes from the second bird. So don't get lost only in the first bird. Energize the second bird. Keep watching and learning. And that learning mind is the true religious mind, because self-knowledge is the key to wisdom. And without wisdom, it will always go wrong, irrespective of what kind of society you are in, what structures you have built, and so on. Because everything needs wisdom, which is the long vision for one to live with, to know what is false and what is true, and not just call it my culture and identify it. One of the difficulties with an educated mind is that it specializes and therefore attends only to a fragment of the entire content and wants to specialize in that. Now, it's true that knowledge is so vast that you have to specialize, but see the consequences of that. If I look at my entire education in physics, all that I know is, can claim to know, is just one chapter of one book. And there are millions of books in that library. So essentially, it reduces us to a lopsided development of the human mind. Very knowledgeable in its own profession and specialization, and extremely ignorant beyond it. And Krishnaji is saying, can you look at whole of consciousness and not just specialize in one fragment, just to earn a living and become proficient in that? Of course, society values that, values you and evaluates you on the basis of your achievement in your specialization. But if we get trapped in that, then we remain extremely ignorant. And therefore, there is a lot of professional knowledge, but it is accompanied with a lot of ignorance and very little wisdom. And we said last time that without wisdom, the knowledge and the power generated and ability generated by knowledge gets misused. All dictators and human beings who have been extremely cruel were very powerful human beings. So power without wisdom is the most dangerous combination human beings are capable of. Therefore, this learning is essential for every human being. It's not a specialization. Every human being needs that. Fritjof Capra, who wrote the book Tao of Physics, was at one time very interested in Krishnamurti's teaching and went to Sanan to listen to him. And after some of his talks, he went to him and asked him, "Sir, do I have to give up science in order to do what you are saying?" And Krishnaji said, "No, sir, but you are a human being first and then a scientist. So learn the art of living, then do your science. But if you so get caught up in doing your science that you ignore the art of living, then you develop this lopsided mind." So this identification with a fragment, whether it is in academics or whether it is on the earth, the particular nation or a particular religion or a particular group or a particular ideology, narrows down the mind. And you need to have a long vision and a broad mind in order to understand whole of life and to discover what is right living. So in a way, this specialization that our education makes us do becomes a prison house, a limitation. And very few come out of it because that leads to success, what the world calls success: power, position, money, and so on. So it's a very tempting prison. But if one sees that, then one has to find time to do this alternative learning, especially the learning about oneself. So Krishnamurti wanted to change education so that it doesn't concentrate only on acquisition of knowledge, but helps the student also to come upon sensitivity, right conduct, right behavior, and this understanding of oneself, what one calls as self-knowledge. So that this inquiry is more essential than the scientific inquiry or the social inquiry, etc., which we inculcate in students in academics. And that's one of the important parts of what Krishnaji is pointing out. He was asked whether this inquiry can be done in a group or it is something very personal and only one can do it for oneself. And he said, no, the truth is the same for everybody. So he suggested what he called dialogue as a means of doing group inquiry. But in order to do that dialogue, you have to give up your identification with your own particular conditioning, your own point of view, and be really willing and eager to learn from other points of view. Listen to your friend, what he says, and talk about his experiences and your experiences, and go deeper together into this inquiry. We have been trained into debating, which is that we identify, we take a stand, we identify with a particular point of view and then defend it. When you do that, it becomes like a confrontation, a competition, a division between one point of view and another point of view. And then, of course, the smarter, the cleverer, the better lawyer argues the case and wins the case. That's not the truth. You may win all the cases, but you don't come upon truth that way. So it's important to understand this and to be able to listen to criticism or any statement of anybody, even if that be Hitler, and listen to it. What is he trying to say? What does he mean? And then ask yourself the question, is that true? And don't answer that question just through logic and through intellect, but watch, stay with that question, watch in your life and get the answer from the watching. It's a bit akin to doing experiments in science. Why do we make students do experiments in science? Why don't we just teach Newton's laws and theory of relativity all on the board and as formally? Because somewhere when you do the experiments and you verify for yourself, the understanding goes deeper. And that's what Krishnaji is saying also is true of our understanding of ourselves. That when we relate it to observing ourselves, our consciousness, the way it functions, with a learning mind, then it goes deeper. Our understanding goes deeper. And in the passage which I just read, he starts from the simple fact of putting your room in order and goes deeper and deeper into the cultural illusions, into the effect of comparison, and then finally love and to being nobody, nothing, anonymous. So there are illusions at deeper and deeper levels, and one has to persist in this inquiry. And somewhere he said that unless you are serious about this inquiry, don't engage in it. Because if you listen to the truth and don't act on it, it will poison you. It will poison you because you will get half-baked ideas and it will produce more conflict within yourself. But if you pursue it, then you go deeper. That's what it means to be serious. That you are not just trying to solve one particular problem which you are having, but you are trying to understand human consciousness as a phenomenon. And it's operating within you, and you can watch that. You can't watch other people's consciousness, but it functions exactly the same way as yours does. So when you have understood your consciousness, you have actually understood the consciousness of whole of humanity. So for that, one has to be able to think together, to work cooperatively, to think together. And you don't think together when there is division. So in a dialogue group also, division arises the moment you are attached to your own conditioning or your own knowledge or your own ideas. But if you are not attached, you are open, you are doubting it. Because what is your opinion? Your opinion is the opinion of one conditioned mind. And your friend's opinion is the opinion of another conditioned mind. And no opinion is the truth. The truth is to be found in freedom from conditioning. So it's important to hold. You cannot say freedom from conditioning doesn't mean absence of conditioning. You have no way of wiping out all your conditioning within you. If you try to do that, you will reach amnesia, which is not being advocated. But can you hold your conditioning lightly? Can you be aware of the fact that your opinions, there is nothing terribly important about your opinions. But when you identify with them, they become important because they become your possessions. For the same reason, your house becomes important, your property becomes important, your own particular family becomes important for you. You possess those ideas and therefore they become important in your consciousness. So we give importance to some things and ignore other things. That means we are not watching and learning about the whole field of consciousness. In order to perceive the whole field of consciousness, which is necessary for self-knowledge, it's necessary to observe choicelessly, not choose this is important, that is good, this is bad, all that. You have to suspend this judgment and evaluation, all of which comes from your own conditioning. The evaluation of the Christian will be different from that of the Hindu, will be different from that of the atheist, and so on. So that's also affected by our conditioning. And freedom from conditioning is a prerequisite for learning about truth, about yourself. So it's important to doubt your conditioning, including the conditioning from your own experience, because experience also brings prejudice. So all that is a prerequisite for this inquiry. It's a certain amount of humility that I have some ideas, but I don't really know the truth. So when you know that you don't know, that's the beginning for dialogue. Then you listen to the other person, not out of politeness, not tolerating his views, but with an eagerness to listen, because you want to find out what does he think and whether that is true. It's as necessary to investigate that as it is to investigate your own opinions. So it can be done in a dialogue, but the reason it is so difficult for educated people to be in dialogue is because very quickly this identification takes place, fragmentation takes place, and it turns into a discussion, a debate, not thinking together towards what the truth is. You have to posit the truth as the unknown and then inquire into it, because it needs a creative perception in order to come upon the truth. And the dialogue can only create the question in your mind. And how do you investigate that question? It's entirely up to you what learning you can get from that. After all, millions of people listened to Krishnamurti. Perhaps nobody completely understood what he was pointing out. But there were people who gave up quickly They said, oh, what he's talking is nonsense, and they walked out. They got nothing out of it. There were others who engaged with it and came to a certain amount of understanding and then stopped learning. So there are, in self-knowledge also, there are the wisdom. You may not come upon total wisdom. You may not have total freedom from all illusion, total freedom from all conditioning. But if you have broken one illusion, that man is wiser. If you have given up casteism, you have given up religious extremism, you have given up the notion of man being superior to a woman, if you have learned not to compare yourself with others, it's a big change in your consciousness. It's not total freedom. Total freedom, we don't know what it is. We assume that Krishnamurti was a totally free man. Not everybody agrees on that. And how would you know what he was inside? And why should you know? What is the importance of it? Supposing he was a completely free man, or he was not, in either case, the question remains the same for you. So it's not important to evaluate the teacher and say, I will listen only to a teacher who has. That's true in a field of knowledge. You can evaluate the teacher and you may prefer to learn from Einstein rather than your physics teacher in the school or college. It has a meaning there. But in this field, it has no meaning because it's the question that is the guru, not the teacher who is the guru. The question is pleasure the same thing as happiness? Irrespective of the source of that question, the question and how you investigate it determines how much learning you will get out of that. So, it's important to come upon this ability to think together and to have a mind that is in dialogue with itself, not necessarily with another, even with itself. You can see both points of view without taking sides with it. You can see what communists say, you can see what capitalists say, you can see what is true in this and what is false. You can also see what is true in the other and what is false. And you may come upon a deeper understanding than either of these two. So that is the nature of this learning mind. It lives with questions and not with conclusions. The other thing necessary is to approach everything afresh, not with the burdens of yesterday. That's again very difficult because the training in our education has been to accumulate knowledge and then seek further knowledge and so on. In this field, the knowledge that you acquired yesterday is not necessarily a help. In fact, if you are attached to that, it becomes a barrier to further learning. So knowledge doesn't have the same role here as it has in science or in any other academic field. Nagarjuna said it is not with knowledge and it's also not without knowledge. It is not with reason and it is also not without reason. So you have to find the right place of knowledge, neither discard it nor extol it as everything, but put it in its right place. Put thought and logic and reason in its right place. Use it. That's what the art of living is. And you can't learn art, which is right relationship with that faculty. You can't learn that from a teacher. It's not like an engineering thing that where should I draw the line. You will have to sense that for yourself. And that's why it is part of self-knowledge. So there is tremendous order in nature. There is no ego in nature. But there is tremendous order. And the scientists study that order and give us the laws which govern that order. It is there in our body. That order is functioning in our body. It's not created by us. All I do is a little exercise and eat some food, and 1,000,000 things happen just rightly inside this body. That's tremendous intelligence and tremendous order of nature, which is functioning there. Why is the consciousness in so much disorder? Why is it not in order? Why is there conflict? Why is there division? I want to love, but I hate. And I say one thing and I do another. Why all this hypocrisy and duplicity in our life? When you examine that deeply, you will find that one is constantly putting on faces, pretenses. You are one kind of human being in the office, another kind of human being at home, and yet another kind of human being in the church or the temple. In each place, you adopt policies which would lead to success in that activity. So ego just takes different forms in different places. In each place, you are doing what you make for success. So you have to be careful. This ego can attach itself to very noble desires and noble things. In fact, that was what the established religions prescribed. They said, have noble desires, don't have ignoble desires. Have good habits, don't have bad habits. And Krishnaji is saying, no, it is not the object of desire which is important. Its desire itself is a problem. If you approach life with desire, it will have its own consequences. Either your desire will be fulfilled or it is not fulfilled. If it is not fulfilled, you will feel frustration. If it is fulfilled, you will feel satisfaction, but the energy that it was giving, that desire was energizing you, that energy will go and you will have stagnation, which we call boredom, until a new desire is born. And again, you are energized by that new desire. So it becomes a vicious circle in which one is trapped. So it is not a question of whether the desire is for doing virtuous things and or for doing robbing a bank or for building a hospital. If you are doing it ambitiously, that ambition itself has consequences. It's the ego itself is a problem. It is not that the ego needs to be attached to noble things and not to ignoble things. So Krishnamurti is bringing virtue from the level of action into the state of consciousness. The state of mind and consciousness from which an action is being done determines whether it is right or wrong. The religious definition of right and wrong is different from the political or business definition of right and wrong. The politician and the businessman consider that that which is profitable, that which leads to success is right, and that which leads to failure is wrong. That is not the definition in the religious quest of right and wrong. An action which comes from a state of mind which is egoistic is wrong. And an action that is coming out of a state of love and compassion is right action, even if it fails. and the other one is wrong action even if it succeeds. So the rightness or wrongness is not determined by the result. It's determined by your approach, how you are approaching it. Everything can be done egoistically, and the same thing can be done non-egoistically. You can play a game egoistically. When you give tremendous importance to winning the game, it becomes egoistic. You will feel frustration if you lose it. If your friend on the other side falls down and therefore you will win, you will feel happy inwardly, though outwardly you might say sorry, because your aim is to win the game. You're not playing for the joy of the game. There is such a thing as the joy of playing the game, but you are playing for success, for name and fame and so on. It becomes egoistic, and all kinds of negative emotions come from that. So our approach determines. If you approach it egoistically, all the disorder arises from that. If you don't approach it egoistically, then your friend wins because he is a good player. There is nothing to feel disappointed or bad. Indeed, you would thank him and say that I want to play more and learn from you. So the whole approach becomes completely different when you are not approaching it. And then there is no disappointment, no rivalry, no frustration in that. The negative emotions are missing. Now, if that is true of a game, extend that to the whole of life. The whole of life is also a game. It can be played egoistically or it can be played non-egoistically. If you play it egoistically, you will have worries, you will have frustrations, you will have division and quarrels and all that. And if you play it non-egoistically, none of those negative emotions will come into the thing. So we are ourselves the authors of our own sorrow. Means that it is our ignorance which brings sorrow. Ignorance as illusion, as false approach, false mindset with which you are approaching that activity. It is that which brings in, and that is why it requires self-knowledge. It requires understanding what is my right relationship with everything in life. What is the right use of imagination and what becomes the wrong use of imagination. Not right and wrong in some, according to some religion, but right and wrong in the sense that which leads to health, which leads to happiness, which leads to what is good for the whole, that is right. And that which brings unhappiness, which brings disorder, which brings division is wrong. That is the sense in which right and wrong is being used here, not as some moral right and wrong. So it's a learning, and every time there is the perception of disorder in our consciousness, because it's very perceptible, because it brings pain, then normally there is a tendency to escape from that pain or to suppress it. And Krishnamurti is saying, no, that disorder is an opportunity to learn about yourself. Don't suppress it. Don't escape from it. Ask yourself, from where does it arise? Where did that arise in me? Whether you are feeling jealousy, you are feeling anger, you are feeling hatred. Inquire, from where does it arise? How does it grow? What does it do to your relationships and your thoughts and your peace of mind and everything? That's learning from observing in daily life. And it's that kind of learning which brings wisdom and changes what is. His teaching is, if you attentively and choicelessly watch what is undergoes change. But if you want to bring about change directly by controlling, by interfering with it and so on, then it becomes an ego process and it prevents the change. So it is very subtle. This learning process itself has to be free from the ego. It must not be done with the aim of achieving more and becoming successful and so on. It has to be done for the love of learning. That means you have this inquiry itself has to be free from the ego. Because through an ego process, you cannot come to freedom from the ego. Through violence, you cannot come to peace. There is that saying, happiness is not at the end of the road, it's along the way. And similarly, you have to be, if you want peace in society, you must be the peace. It's not that you desire the peace. You must be the peace. So it's very different approach from that normally advocated in most religions, where they prescribe what is virtuous action and what is wrong action, and then urge you to use your will and control yourself and pursue the virtuous actions and avoid the vices. Human beings have tried that, but it's not something that you can do by decision. We went into that last time. Decision works in very superficial things in our life. So any real change is only a byproduct of this learning. And that's why this learning or self-knowledge is essential. And it is the way to end disorder in consciousness. When you end disorder in consciousness, you come upon order. And order in consciousness is virtue. Virtue is at the level of consciousness, not at the level of action. In chapter 3, he also talks about the totality of consciousness. He says that psychologists and so on have divided consciousness as the conscious and the subconscious part. And he points out that there is not a great difference between the conscious and the subconscious. They accept that the subconscious cannot be changed. But Krishna says it's essentially the same. It's also conditioning which is lying very deeply in your consciousness and which produces dreams and gives suggestions which are not very easy to detect. But if you have understood the conscious mind and the conscious mind becomes silent, then the subconscious begins to project itself into consciousness, and that can also be watched and understood, and you can empty it. Then you come to a state where there is no dreams and so on. Now that may be very far from where we are, but he is basically saying that this division is false. There is no clear division between the conscious and the subconscious, that it is all born of conditioning. The biological instincts and so on have become tendencies in human beings. And we have to find what is our right relationship with that tendency. So if we take sexuality, it's a basic instinct, sexual instinct. What is my right relationship with the sexual instinct? If I suppress it, it goes wrong. If I pursue it and expand it, it goes wrong. So what is the right place of that? That is the art of living. And you have to learn that for yourself into that. Similarly, there is violence. A certain amount of violence is innately there in the animal. It is there in us. You can use it to dominate other people and punish other people and use your power to destroy. You can also decimate it. So they have become tendencies, and by learning about them, we are not completely trapped in it. The psychologists and the scientists take it for granted that we are totally trapped in this conditioning, which includes the biological conditioning. It is true in the case of the animal. He is completely determined by instincts. He doesn't need self-knowledge because he has a certain amount of violence in him, but it's also limited by nature. He cannot become like Hitler and decimate a whole species or millions of people. He just kills for eating food and then that's it. That's limited. So one has to understand that none of these capacities which nature has endowed us with in making us human is unnecessary. Yet we have to learn what is the right use of all these capacities. And this learning we can do because nature has put this inquiry into us. It's not that we decide to do inquiry. Inquiry is there in human consciousness. We only direct it. The businessman is inquiring how to make profits. The engineer is wanting to make new devices. His inquiry is that. The politician is inquiring how to win the election. The scientist is inquiring how nature functions. And the religious man is inquiring what is the cause of violence and whether it can be free from it. So the nature of the questions is different in different fields, but inquiry is at the root of it. And every human being has inquiry. We direct that inquiry, but unfortunately, we have neglected this inquiry of learning about oneself. And Krishnaji is pointing out that it is necessary. And if you don't do that, then virtue becomes, practice of virtue produces hypocrisy. You are violent and you decide to be non-violent. So you pretend that you are not violent, you won't hit because you can control your manifestation of the violence within you by holding your tongue or holding your hand. You can do that. But how will you prevent hatred in the heart? The hatred in your heart is already violence. So when you decide to love your neighbor and you don't have love, you will pretend that you love your neighbor because that's what you have to do. And it becomes hypocrisy. You're projecting yourself as loving when you are not feeling that love. So he's saying that's a wrong way to go about it. Don't create the opposite and cultivate the opposite. Deal with what is. Deal with the violence. Deal with the anger. Deal with the jealousy and find out its cause and eliminate that cause because it comes from some sort of false approach or some sort of illusion in our own mind. And when you don't have violence, there is nothing to cultivate as non-violence. I learned this from him in interesting way. Once he gave a talk in Rajghat. That's the school where I was and am even now. And in that talk, he said, a disciplined mind is a lazy mind. And I didn't think so. I thought a disciplined mind is one who's punctual, who is active, who does everything that he says, and so on. So why is Krishna calling him lazy? So I went to him afterwards and I asked him, Sir, you said something in your talk which I didn't understand. He said, what? I said, you said a disciplined mind is a lazy mind. I don't think so. He said, if he is not lazy, sir, why does he have to discipline himself? He said, if I have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, I get up. But if it needs a lot of discipline to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, then I am lazy, isn't it? Find out the cause of why you are lazy, then you don't have to cultivate discipline. Maybe you don't sleep enough, maybe you don't have the right diet, maybe you worry too much about things and therefore your energy is lost and so you are lazy. Set those things right. If you are living rightly, there would be no laziness. That's the way to deal with laziness and not discipline yourself to create a opposite of it. So his teaching is don't postulate what should be and then try to practice what should be. Engage with what is and understand what is and what is undergoes change. The opposite is fictional. Violence is a fact, non-violence is non-fact. It's a projection from the mind of a state which is imaginary. And you are trying to live up to something which is imaginary. His teaching is completely different. He says that produces all kinds of conflict. The conflict between what you are and what you should be. So his teaching is be yourself. If you are angry, be angry. But watch it. Watch it, try to understand from where that anger comes, what it does to you, and to your relationships and so on. You will discover that and you will learn about it, and that learning will bring about change. But if you postulate a state of non-anger and try to practice it, you are not eliminating the causes of anger, then anger will come up again. And what has to be suppressed and controlled on one day, you need to control and suppress it every day, which means you are constantly in battle with yourself. And that's not a religious life. So that's why transformation is born of learning. And your concern has to be with learning for the love of it, not in order to become something. Otherwise, it becomes a desire process. So there are some prerequisites for this learning mind. Simplicity, which doesn't mean just wearing a loin cloth or having very few possessions and so on. Simplicity is to say what you mean and mean what you say. To have only as much as you need and not live with greed. All that is part of simplicity. Humility is to know that you don't know, and therefore you are eager to learn what is true. These are the prerequisites for inquiry. And these are destroyed by the ego process. The egoistic man is hypocritical. The ego in us makes us claim falsely, makes us put on different garbs. Inwardly, it's always seeking something for itself in every relationship. Therefore, it's the opposite of love. Love is to do something not for one's own benefit, but just out of affection, because that's the right thing to do. So, that's what he talks about in chapter 3, the importance of this learning mind and the danger of the egoistic mind. I'll end it here and we can have some discussion.
Sir, the time is 10 minutes past the first hour. We got 50 more minutes left. Would you prefer a break before we start the question answer session, or?
No, we'll do that tomorrow because tomorrow's session is 3 hours. We need a break in between.
Okay.
But I think in today's session, this is fine.
So please, if you have any questions, go ahead and put your name on the chat, and then we'll go ahead and then recognize you, and then you can ask the question. May I go first, sir? I have a question.
Please.
As I have heard from you during this lecture, the first 1 hour of lecture, the order into consciousness can come in. But as I understand, the consciousness as we know is disorder. So only when the disorder can break, can there be the possibility of order to come in. Is my understanding correct or incorrect, sir?
Yes, sir. It is correct because that you can see that is the fact that there is, so long as there is disorder in consciousness in the form of all these negative emotions, which our consciousness is prone to, there are only rare moments when we feel order. Most of the time, the order is quickly destroyed by all kinds of agitation and disturbance from our thinking. So, it has its cause within us, but we tend to blame outwardly. Somebody talked to me rudely, so I normally would blame him that he spoke to me badly, therefore I am hurt and so on. So I blame him and I justify feeling hurt. This is the different approach. There is, of course, an external cause which causes that hurt or anger, but it's more important the inner cause which is operating within us. So that man spoke rudely to me, and why does that create anger in me? And why do I feel enmity towards him? Why am I not able to listen to it and understand it? I gave an example last time of a student who might go out and say that you are a lousy teacher, and that gets communicated to you and you feel hurt. Now, why am I not able to take that as an input of information and find out whether that is true or not, and take it only as an information to learn about myself? Because the mind is not a learning mind. The mind is a reactive mind. It's trying to protect its reputation, to feel secure, and so on. So anybody who criticizes or opposes appears to be an enemy or a threat, and therefore it creates division in the mind. So I had to be free from that reaction. And that reaction is coming from all kinds of assumptions within my mind, which I have not questioned. One of the common assumptions, if I may give an example of that, is that we think other people must suit us. Why? Have other people been created to suit us? Or have we been created to suit them? That's not a fact. The other man has grown up and he has his own ideas and he's leading his life, and you are his friend. Why does he have to suit you? Why does he have to agree with you? Why can you not be friends even if you disagree? So these are the questions with which I would begin. Not very distant philosophic questions like, is the observer the observed, or are they one or not, and so on. You can ask that question when you come to that door, but when you are still dealing with anger and with jealousy and with hypocrisy and with pretense and so on, and you haven't understood desire, so then it has no meaning. It becomes an escapist activity to engage in philosophic arguments about observer and observed. So, as I understand Krishnaji, he's saying, start with your daily life. Whatever is taking place, begin to understand that. Ultimately, of course, there is not a sequence in this because they are all illusions. And it is not that, but when you start examining, the simpler illusions will go first. And deeper illusions, the illusion of being separate from the rest of the people, it may not go. So some illusions lie very deep into that, and you may not come to the perception of that. But if you don't inquire, nothing changes. So you begin this inquiry and don't do it in order to achieve something or get that, because you have to understand that if you do this inquiry itself egoistically, it becomes again a desire process. So it's not a question of noble desire and ignoble desire, but approaching it, life with desire has its own consequences, apart from the object of the desire. So we create the disorder, and unless we learn not to create the disorder from within, we will have disorder in our consciousness. So as I see it, just as in science we say there is a cause for what happens, and then we examine what is the cause. Why does it rain? Oh, because the clouds come. Why do the clouds come? Well, because the breeze brings them. Why does the breeze blow? Because there is a temperature difference. You keep on inquiring and going to the deeper and deeper causation. Krishnaji is saying that about our psyche, that in our psyche also there is causation, and we don't understand that causation. And if it is organic, you can't get rid of it, but you can find out what is the right place of it. If it is born of an illusion, which means your own mind is constructing something which is creating this, either a belief or an opinion or whatever, then you can see the falseness of that and it goes. So you can break an illusion, but you cannot change biology. So there, if it's a biological thing, so we have to see what is biological fear and what is psychological fear. Both are existing in our case. Animals are capable only of biological fear, not of psychological fear. But we are capable of both. So we have a more complex thing to understand and free ourselves of. We'll come to that. There is a chapter on fear in which we will go into that question.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Taghi Amzadi?
Yes.
Right, sir.
Hello, sir. Yeah, would you please repeat that prerequisite for the learning mind and also the obstacle? And that's one question. Another question is relationship of the subconscious and conscious mind. In the reading, some part he, as you mentioned, also he says there is just one. There is no unconscious or subconscious. But in another section, he refers to, he says unconsciously or consciously, we don't know, or we know, something like that. So how is it that there is no subconscious, but he refers to it at times?
No, that was not what he was saying. What he's saying is the subconscious doesn't have a different nature. It is also a conditioning which is lying deeper and which acts subliminally. You know, you are not aware of it. So he says, we know what is going on in our conscious mind because thoughts and all that are very detectable. But what is going on in the subconscious, you are not aware of it immediately. But if we understand the conscious mind and empty it of its illusions and so on, then it becomes a silent mind. And in that silent mind, the projections from the subconscious enter, and then they can also be watched, and you can learn about your subconscious and free yourself of that also. So he's disagreeing with the psychologists like Freud and so on, who took it for granted that the subconscious is something you can't deal with. It is something that you have to interpret dreams and so on and find out what is going on in the subconscious. But he says it's nothing, it is not that his experience was that. But that comes much, I think that's very deep into the inquiry. It's there in a book, I can refer you to it. It's called Wholeness of Life. There is a book by Krishnamurti called Wholeness of Life, where he's having dialogues with David Bohm and some other people. And there he says that all this freedom from the ego and so on is just the first step. Without that, learning has not even started. So what we consider that this freedom from conditioning is the end point of learning, he's saying that's the beginning of learning. And then there is, when you clear that, you understood that, and you have freed yourself of conditioning, then the subconscious enters into the conscious part, and then that also can be understood. And when that is understood and cleared, then the collective subconscious, which is the subconscious of the entire race or so, that enters into it. That can also be. So it's an endless inquiry into it. So yeah, what we are struggling with is that, according to him, at a very superficial level. But you have to go through the superficial before you come to the deep, you see. And your other question, are you able to hear me? I'm not able to hear you. So
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was muted accidentally. So would you please repeat that prerequisite for prerequisite for learning mind?
Yeah. So the learning mind is one that knows that it does not know. Because if you start with that you already know, then you argue and you fight for what you know, right? And that distorts perception. So if you know that you don't know, which means you hold the known lightly. So even in science we do that, no? The scientist has his own theory about something. But if it is pointed out that this theory is false, he drops it. He's not attached to his theory to the point of not listening to the other scientist who points out why it is false. So in the same way, if you hold your opinions lightly and you are not attached to them, you are not building your name and fame on that. See, so you are not attached to it. The moment you learn that it is false, you drop it. The reason we are not willing to drop the illusion is because we have invested in the illusion. So this investment in the illusion, that is the ego. That is the ego. You're milking that illusion somewhere.
So can we go to, Ms. Ramjadi, can we go to Prakash Sharma with his question, please? Prakash, you're on. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Come on, Prakash.
Yeah, sir, I always thought that the ultimate aim of life is to be happy. The mind should be happy, subconscious and conscious, both minds should be happy. And would you please elaborate a little bit more for me that happiness is not the end of the road?
Yes. See, happiness is a byproduct of all this understanding. If you try to pursue happiness directly, you will end up pursuing pleasure. Because pleasure appears like happiness. You eat ice cream and it gives you pleasure and you are happy, like that. But it creates desire and you want more and more pleasure. So then it leads to addictions. And as we said, it produces desire. So then desire has its own consequences. If you approach with desire, you will also have frustration and so on. I think in the next chapter, he deals with desire. So tomorrow we will go into it in great detail. But happiness is a byproduct of right living. And if you learn what right living is so that your relationships don't produce any disorder in consciousness, then there is happiness. There is only joy. There is not suffering. There is not pain and sorrow and all that. So it's a byproduct of this learning which we are talking about.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sir, Mr. Guru Prasad, sir, would you like to go next?
Solunga, sir. Guru? Yeah.
You're muted, Guru Prasad, you're muted. Unmute yourself. You need to unmute yourself, sir.
Rohan, you have not muted him, have you?
Yeah, I have unmuted.
No, I just
now.
unmuted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Professor Krishna.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Good, good.
Okay.
You were reading the statement from Meeting Life on Transformation.
Yes.
And one of the things that struck me is when you see jealousy, change it immediately is what Krishnaji says.
Yeah.
I'm kind of not taking it literally to change it by any type of voluntary action, but just by observing and watching. That's the first part of the question. Is that accurate? And secondly, even when he says just by watching or observing, change happens, that also we must pause it as a question and really not take it as a as the reality, because we really don't know. Just by watching or observing, change does happen. Does change really happen?
Yes, sir. See, that is why he says, don't just interpret my words and take that as the teaching. They are pointing to a truth. And if you investigate that, you will come upon the truth. So this trying to interpret his words and derive meaning out of it becomes wrong. He is urging that only to make us investigate into and come upon the truth. Now, when he says, don't let jealousy flower, he's saying you can't not change it by will, because he has already pointed out that your decision or suppression or will becomes another ego process and creates division and conflict. So that's not what is implied in that. When he says, don't let it flower, he is saying, watch it, understand it so deeply that it goes. Don't let it continue for a long time and take root in you, because it creates further complications. No? If you allow jealousy to continue, then it creates more complexity, because it will lead to further actions on your part, which will create more problems. But if you immediately perceive it, then it doesn't. I'll give you an example which is probably easier to understand. How does habit formation take place? Or how does addiction take place? Say addiction to smoking. A man was not addicted to smoking, but then he is going with friends and they introduce him to smoking. Initially it's unpleasant, but then they say, oh, come on, we are chicken, we can smoke so many, why are you not able to smoke? So in that competition, he starts smoking more and so on. And ultimately, it builds a chemistry within his body, and now it becomes irresistible and he's not able to give up that. So if he was aware of the danger of addiction right from the beginning, as soon as he felt uncomfortable without a cigarette, he would know that I am beginning to get addicted. It can be addiction to coffee. It can be addiction to alcohol. Any kind of addiction. It can be addiction to your work. If you are becoming uncomfortable without it, it's pointing out that you are getting addicted. And if you are aware of the danger, at that time you can easily end it. But if you continue with it for a long time, it takes roots in your mind or body, and then it becomes very difficult. For alcoholics, even Alcoholics Anonymous and being admitted in hospital, they are not able to break that habit. But if you are aware of it, the moment you see that I'm feeling restless without this thing, it is already a sign to you. And if you are aware of it, you can give it up very easily at that time. So to detect things quickly, that is part of awareness. If you are watching and you are aware, you have a learning mind, you detect it and don't allow it to grow to a point where it creates a very complex thing. And so, for example, if you take the example of jealousy, well, if the jealousy is allowed to continue and marriages break down, out of that jealousy and so on. So it becomes more complication and the children will suffer because of that. So as soon as you notice that jealousy is there, you need to attend to it and find out the cause of it, which is basically comparison and possession and all that. So if you eliminate the root cause, then it goes. But if you are unaware of it and you don't want it and you think jealousy is inevitable because where there is love, there is bound to be jealousy and so on, which means you have not really understood the difference between love and attachment. Because attachment, where there is attachment, there is jealousy. In love, there is no jealousy. So that's what I understand from that, what he says. Change it, he himself has pointed out that you cannot change it by decision. You can only change it by learning. So he's saying attend to it. Attend to it, don't ignore it. That's how I understand that statement. Don't let it flower means don't ignore it. But you have to, of course, stay with the question. So long as it is persisting, you haven't perceived the danger of it. You have not perceived the falseness of it.
Can we go to the next question, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Baldev Bohra. Unmute yourself, sir.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Hi, Professor Krishna. I have a question
Please.
regarding transformation. And like you quoted from the book, that it's also in your book, also on page 405, that Krishnamurti says that when you are observing, seeing the dirt on the road, seeing how politicians behave, and this is transformation.
No, not this is transformation. As you perceive this with a learning mind, there is transformation. Not just perceive without a learning mind.
No, of course, I'm a learning mind.
Yeah.
But this, stuff also constitutes a transformation is there. It's a transformation in your consciousness.
Yes, that is, if you go deeply into the causation of that and free yourself from that causation, which is because it's coming from some illusion or some construct which you are not questioning, then it will go. So as part of the learning, he's saying not learn just intellectually or from a book, but learn by watching.
No, I understand, sir.
Yeah. So the question is, the learning mind attends to that immediately because it's a disorder. And as soon as disorder is perceived, I must learn about it and free myself from the disorder. Otherwise, it builds up.
Yeah, that's right. But my question is that on one hand, Krishnamurti talks about transformation as the total change in the consciousness.
Yeah.
And on the other, we have these specific areas like jealousy and anger and violence and all these areas. So if we are able to, let's say jealousy, as you mentioned, and I had asked you in your first discussion about jealousy that I overcame that.
Yeah.
So that was a transformation for me. I got rid of it by observing it, going into the causation and all the rest of it. But does that one transformation means the total transformation of the consciousness?
No.
Or not?
No. It is
That's what I want to. That's what I would like you to please explain a little bit more.
I am explaining that it is a partial transformation. And I had given this, to explain that, I had given the metaphor of a big tree.
Yes.
Saying the root of the tree is the ego, and each branch, one branch is fear, another branch is sorrow, another is jealousy, and
yes.
So one particular branch manifests in our consciousness at any given time. And you begin to observe that and learn about it. So if you are satisfied with just ending that particular branch, then you don't reach up to the root, and therefore there are still other branches which will grow. So you are not freed yourself of desire and of ambition and division, so violence and all that, but you have freed yourself of just one thing, namely jealousy or one thing, habit, some habit you have broken. So it's a partial transformation. That particular thing ends for you, but all disorder has not ended. So you have to persist with it. Now, there are two things with it. You can persist in the sense you go from one branch to another branch and so on. Or you continue with that branch and you are not satisfied satisfied just with ending that pain of that particular problem, but you continue further, then ultimately it's connected to the root. So you can go up to the understanding of the ego, and if you uproot the whole tree, then you're free of the whole field. And that is what would correspond to liberation. That is total freedom. But we don't know about total freedom. I mean, we don't
Yeah,
know
that's
about,
the kind of
we don't
question.
talk about it. So that is you do, then you're no longer a separate individual, and you feel one with everything in life and so on.
Yes.
So that is an ultimate state, moksha or mukti and all that in Hinduism. But when you begin with this inquiry, wherever that takes you is where you get. You may not come up to that total freedom.
Right. Okay.
As much as you have all the illusion, as much illusion as you have ended, that much freedom you have. For instance, if you have seen the falseness of comparison,
Yes.
comparing yourself with other people, which is normally we are trained into that by our education. If you see the falseness of that and you free your mind of comparing yourself with your neighbor and your classmate and all that, you're freed of jealousy, superiority, inferiority, hierarchy. All that is produced by comparison. So a lot of disorder ends, which means a lot of waste of energy is now not there. So you have more energy now for further inquiry. Yeah. Otherwise, you lose a lot of energy in all this conflict within yourself and so on.
Yeah,
And
that's
it
true.
needs a lot of energy for this inquiry to go on. It needs
Right.
a tremendous lot of energy.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Rohan, you want to go next, Rohan?
Yes. Hello, sir. So my question is regarding the word you use, a rather strong word as poisoning, when if there is a seeing of truth and not acting upon it, then potentially, it has this
It'll set
effect
up a
of
conflict.
perhaps
It'll set
poisoning.
up a conflict within you. It'll set up a conflict between you because you now know what it should be, and you are not that. So there will be a conflict between what is and what should be. That is when there is only intellectual understanding of what should be.
Right.
Yeah. But when you have seen the danger of what is, the what is ends, then there is no need for what should be. If you see the danger of hatred and hatred ends, there is no need for non-violence to be cultivated. The opposite doesn't have to be cultivated. If you are free from fear, there is no need for courage. You need courage because you are fear. You cultivate courage in order to suppress fear or overcome fear. So that, you see, in negating what is, the positive is, it is positive. But in pursuing the positive, it is conflict.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Nandini, you want to go next?
Thank you. Actually, I wanted to ask about consciousness. What I know very logically is that human consciousness is made of conditioning, layers of conditioning, biological conditioning, evolutionary conditioning. And when awareness is present, not that I am aware, but awareness is present, the whole energy of awareness dissolves conditioning. But I think I heard, I may be wrong, but I think I heard that you said consciousness is made of conditioning and awareness. Now, my question is, if I didn't, I mean, if you didn't say that, then I have no question. But if awareness is a part of the consciousness, then how can it put light on the conditioning? Because it itself is a part of the consciousness.
Yeah, no. Awareness is a capacity. You can be aware of whatever is going on. You can be aware of egoistic motive in you. You can be aware of your thoughts, your desires, your fears. You can be aware, because awareness is this capacity to watch and see what is going on inside you. So it is not a content. Awareness is the intrinsic quality of consciousness. I'm not using it in the sense of an expanded awareness or a narrow awareness, not in degrees. I'm using it as in a capacity to watch oneself. Whatever is going on, even if jealousy is going on, egoistic activity is going on, the capacity to watch is there. It's the second bird. The second bird has the capacity to watch what the first bird is doing. And the first bird is the ego. It is suffering, it is feeling pleasure and pain and sweetness and all that, the first bird. The second bird is this capacity to watch, which is the awareness. Now, of course, if the ego is very strong, the awareness shrinks, but it is not completely absent. Otherwise, you would be completely blocked. Yeah, even, for example, if you look at history, even a man like Ashoka, Emperor Ashoka, who was a very cruel king, he, after the Kalinga War, suddenly comes upon some perception and changes, and thereafter he becomes this is a historical fact, that he became a very benevolent and kind king afterwards. So the possibility of realization, not complete realization, not total freedom, but to see the falseness of something, that is never completely blocked by any conditioning. See, Krishnamurti would have been conditioned into theosophy, no? But if it had blocked him completely, he couldn't have come upon his teaching.
So when we say that consciousness is made of its content, does that include awareness too?
No. Awareness is the intrinsic quality of consciousness. It is not a content of consciousness. Content is the condition,
Yeah.
including biological conditioning, all that. So the conditioning also throws up a reaction into consciousness, which is watched by the awareness. So you can watch what is going on there. And that distorts perception. So there is this interference. What you see is the same as what I see, but we react differently because you have a different conditioning and I have a different conditioning. But when you look at a tree, you see a tree. And I also see the tree. So the awareness is the same in that sense, but the reaction is not the same, because the reaction is coming from the conditioning. And if we free ourselves from the conditioning, then what you see is the truth.
And awareness is the only thing that frees, right?
Yeah, awareness is this capacity to watch anything. I don't see the difficulty that in that. It is not a content. You don't watch. You can't watch awareness. Awareness is the thing that is watching everything else. The content, who sees the content? It is the awareness that sees the content inside, but it is not part of the content. So it's the second bird, no? The second bird is this capacity just to watch. And the learning comes from the second bird, is what the Upanishad said.
Thank you.
That's why wisdom is not completely blocked, even for someone who is very strongly conditioned. It's not completely blocked because the capacity for inquiry and the capacity for awareness is still there in that mind.
Mhm.
But it may not exercise that. It may exercise the capacity for inquiry only to further the ego, egoistic inquiry, in which case it will not learn. It's not a learning mind. It will be only a reactive mind, seeking success and so on. There is that story, it's a beautiful story of Alexander going and talking to Diogenes. Yes.
That's my favorite.
Yes, where Diogenes asks him, well, what are you going to do? And he says, I'm going to attack Persia and conquer Persia. And so what will you do after that? And he says, then I will attack Iraq, and then after that, so then I'll Afghanistan, and then I will attack India. And then ultimately he says, then I'll come back home. So Diogenes asks him, what prevents you from doing that now? So it's just your own ambitions that are causing that, his own ambitions to do this. But if he saw through that, the whole cruelty was not necessary. He could have just gone home. So the capacity to see, after all, when Krishnaji talks, he is trying to awaken this capacity to see. The awakening of intelligence. Intelligence in Krishnaji's sense is this capacity to inquire and discern what is true and what is false. That is the intelligence. Not intelligence as we define it in society, as ability at a particular profession or knowledge and so on.
Can we go
Yes,
to
sir.
questions?
Or discrimination is one of the qualities of learning mind.
Can we take the next question, sir?
Yes, please.
Prasad Mandava.
I mean, that's great questions, and thank you for taking this question. This is like, I would like to know a little bit about the common mind. If human consciousness is the same in all humans, why not the disorder drop off in all humans when great sages like Buddha and Krishnaji paid full attention to the total field of consciousness? If the total field is the same, how does this unified human consciousness work, or common mind? I mean, any...
Yeah. No, we share that common universal consciousness, but our brains are programmed differently because we have grown in different environment and so on. And the brain is like a computer, and the computer gets programmed from where you are born and you grow up. So all your experiences, all that produces the conditioning. But the reaction from the conditioning also enters into consciousness. Yeah. So that is different for me and for you and for another person. And if I am attached to that, then it divides me from you. But if I am aware of this whole process, I understand. Just as I understand that the food you like depends on what you were fed in childhood, and what I was fed in childhood was different, so I like that food. And it doesn't create division between us if I understand that. If you can understand like that about conditioning, then you will not create division. But you compare and you say, my conditioning is superior to his conditioning, and you want to convert the other fellow to your conditioning. All these complications create division. So you have to ask this deeper question, when does a difference become a division, and why? There is a psychological process, because difference is normal. Throughout nature, no two trees are alike, no two dogs are alike, no two individuals are alike. So, and we are able to see differences as differences, but some differences seem to create division. between blacks and whites. I mean, just the color difference produces division and caste division and so on. So when you identify, when you invest and you feel superior and inferior, you create like and dislike. There is a process of measurement and evaluation and like and dislike, which creates like and dislike. It's a psychological process which creates this. Otherwise, you would just notice that the Muslim has been taught to go into a mosque and pray to God, and the Hindu has been taught to sing bhajans and in front of a statue and pray like that. That's what he is doing. So where is the division? If you just see the difference as difference, there is no. But if you feel, no, this is my religion and that is superior and the other is an infidel and so on, you are creating division by that kind of thinking.
So I have to deal with my conditioning.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you very much for taking this.
Right.
That was the last question, sir, unless anybody else has anything to bring up for Professor. We just have 5 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes left in the hour.
Let's just sit silent for a while, for 5
Yes,
minutes.
sir.
And
Yes,
then
sir.
And we meet again tomorrow, no? Tomorrow
Yes,
we will
sir.
have 2 sessions, yeah. I'll deal with chapter 4 and then chapter 5.
So perhaps we can end the session right now then.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
You're
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ron.
See you tomorrow at 2 o'clock
Yeah, surely.
Pacific time.
Pacific time, yes.
5 o'clock my time. 5 to 8 for me, yeah. That's
Yes,
fine.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Krishna.
Thank you.